Here we are back at the work site, and this is where we're going to build our double track tunnel. You may want to go ahead and power up your hot glue gun, and while it's warming up, I'll go over how we're going to build this tunnel. I've got all those tunnel sections that we just made right here, and just to give you an idea of how we're going to make this tunnel, what we're going to do is arrange these tunnel sections one right after the other, like this. Now I'm just estimating their position right now. Once we start building the tunnel, I'll get more precise. But I just want to give you a general idea of what we're going to be doing. And we're going to arrange them just like that to give the basic shape of the tunnel. And then all these holes that are between the sections, we'll fill those in with more foam. We're going to make some more of that window screen foam. And while it's still soft and malleable, we'll take the hot glue gun and fill in these holes with that foam. And so in the end, the tunnel will be one solid piece. And then we'll take the entire tunnel off, put the rock molds inside, decorate the rocks to make them look realistic, and then we'll put the whole tunnel back on the layout and then secure it down with hot glue. Then we'll put the tunnel portal on the front of the tunnel, and the tunnel will be complete. I've got my first tunnel section in place where I want my tunnel to begin, and I've got it evenly over the tracks with an equal amount of buffer space on either side. I like to have about an inch of buffer space between the tunnel wall and where the ballast begins. And like I said earlier, that's probably a little more buffer space than we need, but I like to be safe and go a little wider than is really needed. And if this buffer space looks a little weird now, don't worry about it, because keep in mind, we're going to put rocks on the inside of this tunnel, and that'll bring it in a little bit. And then on top of that, we're going to put this tunnel portal here later. So in the end, it'll look perfectly fine. If you look at this section of tunnel, you'll notice that the walls are angled out a little bit. And that's because this section of tunnel is actually a little bit too narrow for this span of track right here. And right now you're probably saying, well, Eric, why didn't you just make a wider tunnel template so that this thing would be wide enough? But that really wouldn't help, because when you're doing double tracks, sometimes the tracks are a little closer together and sometimes they drift apart a little bit. So when you're doing double track tunnels, you're always going to have to make adjustments on site to compensate for the varying distances between the two tracks. Unless, of course, you're doing like a straightaway where the tracks are going to be equal distance apart the entire time. But on a curve like this, where I've got different diameter curves on each loop, the tracks are going to be closer sometimes they're going to be further apart. In this particular instance, they're a little further apart, and so the tunnel section is a little narrow. Well, that's easily fixed. All we're going to do is use that scrap piece of foam we had when we were done making this tunnel section. We're going to cut this section in half, take some hot glue, and splice it right there and make the tunnel just a little bit wider. So all I'll do is take my scissors, just cut right there, cutting it in half. Here's my scrap piece of foam. I'm just going to put some hot glue on it, just like that. And now I'm going to take my tunnel halves and put them back together, leaving a little space between them. And this scrap piece of foam will fill in that space. Just like that. And just give it a minute for the hot glue to dry. And then, when we put it back over the track, now you can see that instead of having those angled walls, they're nice and straight. And you would do the same thing if you wanted to make the tunnel section just a little bit more narrow. You would cut them in half, and then cut a little bit off of one of the halves, and then splice them back together with a scrap piece of foam. Alright, we're ready to finally start putting our tunnel together. So what I'm going to do is turn this tunnel section over, and on the ends here just put a dab of hot glue. You don't want a lot, because we're not putting this down permanently yet. This is going to come back up later when we put the rock molds in. So you just want enough to temporarily hold it in place. Now I'm going to position it where I want it. Just make sure it's about even on either side of the track. And there we go. And now this section is in place temporarily. And what we're going to do is the same exact thing with all those other extra sections of tunnel. we're just going to keep on going. I've got 4 sections of tunnel in place now, and you can see the tunnel starting to take shape. But before we go any further back, I'm going to make some more window screen foam and use it to fill in the gaps between these tunnel sections. I've made a big piece of foam here, and I'm just going to cut it up into small pieces and start patching up these holes. Okay, I've cut a little section of foam from that big sheet that I just made, and I'm just going to put some hot glue on it. And then what I'll do, carefully because this glue is hot, is just put it right here in between these 2 sections of tunnel. Like that. And now these 2 tunnel sections are joined together. And I'm going to just keep doing the same thing all the way around and all the way back. Okay, I'm done patching this section up and all the foam is hardened into place, and now it's pretty sturdy. You remember a few minutes ago this thing looked pretty flimsy, but now that it's all together, it's got some strength to it. And when we line the interior with rock molds, it'll get even stronger. Now if this was all the tunnel I was going to do, I could stop here, pull this off, and start lining the interior with rock molds. But this tunnel's pretty long. It's going to go all the way back to where you see those yellow double stacks back there. So what I'm going to do is the exact same thing I did here, all the way back. Okay, there we go. The foam hard shell for this tunnel is now complete. And now it's time to move on to the next phase, which is lining the interior of the tunnel with rocks. And so what we're going to do is pop the entire tunnel off of the table. It'll come off in one big piece. And then we'll start manufacturing rocks for the interior of the tunnel. And those rocks will be made from the same foam we've been using, along with the plastic casting resin. To take it off the layout table, all we need to do is just pull up slightly on it, and the entire tunnel should come off in one big piece. Just like that. And then we turn it over. Now you can see the underside of the thing, and this is where we're going to make the rock molds and line the interior with those rocks.